In today's video, we're going to be looking at lower body strength for hockey. Super important that you've got well-developed lower body strength because it's a sport which is explosive. It requires repeat sprint ability and the ability to accelerate quickly. So in this video, I'm going to give you the top 5 exercises for lower body strength for hockey and a very detailed strength session at the end that shows you exactly how to put this all together. Exercise number one we've got is the split squat. Now, the reason why this is such an effective exercise is for a number of reasons. First of all, we've got movement specificity. When we look at hockey, a lot of the time you're in a split stance position, whether that's shooting, tackling, passing, getting into low shapes in the D. There's always a split stance position. It's very rare and likely you're going to be standing in a bilateral squatting position. And therefore, a split squat's really effective for that reason. It just makes it more relevant to the demands of the sport. Secondly, it addresses asymmetry. If you've got differences between left and right side, super key to be able to address those things, because what we don't want is to accumulate asymmetry over time, which increases the risk of injury. It's important we're training limbs independently so we can build up strength in one side if, for example, it's particularly down. And again, we don't want more than a 5 to 10% difference on either side. That way we can target a single leg really effectively. Third of all, we get some really effective adductor loading. The hip and groin, one of the most commonly injured areas in hockey. So if we can get ourselves into these low shapes, we can target the adductor magnus muscle group, for example, when it is at its most optimal position to be loaded in deep hip flexion here, for example. So not only is it relevant to the position, but it's also relevant to the muscle demands in those positions too. And finally, hip range of motion. Typically, hockey players haven't always got the best range of motion in the hips. And it's important to have that because if you don't, you get lower back loading, for example, which you don't necessarily want. And it's also going to mean that you don't always get into the most effective positions. So your coach might be saying to you, get into the most effective position, and you might just not be physically capable of doing that. So this addresses that problem as well. So that's the first exercise, split squat. Make sure adding that into your program every single week. Number 2 is the Romanian deadlift. And before I forget, I'm actually going to play the video on these, just so you've got an example of what this looks like. Now, the reason why this is such an effective exercise is because of a few reasons. First of all, we're going to get this really nice hamstring eccentric loading at the bottom here, by which I mean the muscle is being lengthened under tension, and that's really key for reducing the risk of injury to the hamstring group. Most commonly, this happens when we're sprinting, when the hamstring is lengthening in swing phase. In other words, as the foot is lowering back down towards the ground again, when it's experiencing the highest rates of loading, highest amounts of force, and that is typically an eccentric contraction. So the important thing to do is to target this a number of different ways. Firstly, we can do this effectively with a Romanian deadlift by loading those hamstrings eccentrically. Second, it's going to teach hip hinge mechanics. This action here is a hip hinge. And what we want to be able to see is a neutral spine, vertical shin, and hips being pushed back there, getting into flexion. Now, if we don't do that effectively, what you get is rounding through the lumbar spine, which again is a big problem in hockey. We want to try and avoid that as much as possible. And secondly, we're going to put loading in the wrong places if we're not doing this right. So, we might be, for example, squatting in this position ineffectively, loading the lower back, loading the upper back, any number of reasons why this could go wrong. So it's important we can learn this movement really effectively. Third of all, then, is grip strength. The really important thing in hockey is to be able to be strong because you're obviously gripping the stick, and that can fatigue over the course of a game, course of a tournament. So if we can train grip strength, we're also going to make sure that we're building the requisite strength and grip as well. So a really effective way of doing that. Other exercises that are effective for building a number of different things as well as grip strength, things like holds, carries, chin-ups. So anything kind of pulling based is going to work really well. Okay, moving on. Number 3, the back squat. Now, caveat this. The first exercise I said, we're rarely in a bilateral stance. It's important to train a single leg. But on the flip side, if we want pure loading, in other words, we just want to be able to load the tissues as heavy as possible, well, because of the instability in a single leg exercise or a split stance exercise like a split squat, you can't load it as heavy because you're going to be off balance and you just naturally can't load it as much. So if you just want absolute loading, in other words, total amount of load through the body, then this is a fantastic way of doing it. So we just want to get as strong as possible in our lower body. It's pretty hard to beat a back squat because you're going to be able to get lots and lots loading through that. Now, there might be some reasons why you don't do this exercise. You might be, for example, compromising the lower back. So something like a leg press might work better. But for a lot of hockey players, getting strong in a back squat will pay off in a number of different ways. Firstly, as I said, because of maximal loading, we can load it heavy, which is going to have a huge amount of impact on all sorts of areas, our power, our speed, our injury reduction, hypertrophy and building the muscles around the hip and lower body. And second of all, hip range of motion. Again, we're going to train good hip range of motion throughout full hip flexion, throughout full range of motion, which is really important because, again, we've got to be low to the ground. And this is a great way of doing it. We can get ourselves into low positions under load and effectively with hips below the knees, a tall torso without loss of spinal alignment, and being able to do that under load as well. It's a fantastic way to reduce the risk of injury as well as make ourselves more explosive for hockey. And then finally, acceleration. There's a lot of correlation between the stronger you are as an athlete in a back squat, the faster you can accelerate. So if you improve your lower body strength, it's going to have a trade-off here. You're going to be able to improve your acceleration. So if you find yourself not particularly strong or not be able to back squat effectively, start off by improving your technique and learning how to squat really safely and really effectively, and then begin to load it up so you can then improve your acceleration and a whole host of other factors through back squatting. Okay, calves, really important. Ankle injuries are the single most common soft tissue injury in hockey. So we've got to address those with calf loading. The reason why calves are so important is they are the major muscle group. So the gastrocnemius and the soleus, the two muscles of the lower limb there, which provide the most amount of stability, as well as things like the peroneals as well and smaller muscle groups. But the key ones here are the calves. So we've got to make sure we're targeting these because we want to reduce the risk of ankle injuries, which is super common. If you're a hockey player, you may well have had an ankle sprain at some point in the past. It's going to improve range of motion through full dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Dorsiflexion being where your toes are being pulled up towards your shin, plantar flexion where you're pushing your toes away. It's also going to improve that. Third of all, sprinting. Big contributor towards sprinting is the soleus and calf muscle group. So the stronger they are, more robust they are, more they can contribute to making you quicker as well. And then in change of direction, they're going to do what's called attenuating. So imagine sort of just decelerating, taking the loading out of the lower body when we're decelerating fast. So imagine you've got to plant your foot quickly. When your foot hits the ground, it's the ankle joint that is taking the brunt of loading there first. So you've got to make sure the muscle groups around that are strong enough to tolerate it to be able to then move, plant, rechange direction effectively. And again, just to show you on the video what we mean by this, we want to see, again, good full range of motion on these exercises. And what it's going to allow you to do is a number of things: improve range of motion, reduce risk of injury, improve your ability to sprint, change direction. So super, super important exercise. Loads of variations here as well. Don't just do single leg unloaded calf raises like this video shows. We can do these in double leg. We can do the single leg. We can do isometrics. We can do them walking. We can do them on a flat surface. Loads of ways to add variety to this exercise, but just making sure every week as a non-negotiable, you've got calf raises in your program. Okay, final exercise then is the bridge isometric. We spoke earlier about hamstring injuries being a really key one. So what you'll find with a bridge isometric is that it's going to really target a couple of key things here. First of all, the sprint positions you find yourself in when hamstring injuries occur the most. We said it was end of swing phase. So if we look at this exercise and the position you get into at the top here, this angle, so a fairly large angle at the knee where the hamstrings are undergoing a lot of loading, is effectively sort of replicating that running position you're going to find yourself in swing phase. It's going to be loading a very specific angle here that is relevant to when those hamstring injuries occur. Second to this, the hamstrings are just undergoing a lot of tension a lot of the time in hockey because you're in a flex position, low to the ground. So because of that, and your hips being pushed backwards, your hamstrings are under load a lot of the time. So making them robust is going to be key. And we can target this a number of different ways. Firstly, with the RDLs, second, with sprinting itself, and thirdly, with isometrics to target key positions that those hamstrings are going to be in so that we can improve the amount of loading. Now, the reason why an isometric is better, arguably, than a more dynamic hamstring bridge for this specific purpose is because you can hold a key position for a longer period of time. So you're actually targeting the range of motion and the length of the tissue that we want. And that means we can increase the loading. So you can actually add more load to the hamstring muscle group, which is obviously going to be really effective for reducing the risk of injury to that key muscle group. Okay, putting this all together then, this would be an example lower body session. Just to caveat this, again, it's not individualized. It's not for any particular individual. This is just if you wanted to follow a strength program and this is going to give you that kind of structure, this is what it could look like. Other caveats, this is not for young athletes. So if you're a young athlete or you haven't lifted before, do not do this. Okay, this is for an athlete who's had a number of years experience. Basically, you know what you're doing, you can lift competently, you've lifted heavy before, and it's safe for you to do so. Okay, so with all those caveats aside, please only do this if it's safe for you to do so. The first thing to do is obviously hip and ankle movement prep. If we're about to do lower body loading, it's important that we're preparing the hip and ankle for those key movements. So making sure that the hips are ready, things like hip internal rotations, Spider-Mans, hamstring flossing. And if you aren't sure what those exercises are, go onto my channel and look for the movement prep video that I've put together. That will give you a bit of a clearer outline of what those exercises look like, how to prepare for the session. Should be around 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how much time you've got available. But don't rush through this. Make sure your body is feeling really good, particularly if you've been sitting for a while or you just, it's the end of a long day or whatever it might be. Just make sure your body is ready for the session. So don't rush it. Exercise number one then is that barbell back squat. Because of its nature, we can load this really heavy. Now, the outcome we're trying to get from this session is maximal strength and also a bit of capacity of certain muscle groups. So if we're going to try and get maximal strength out of it, the first exercise should be multi-joint and it should be the heaviest loading. So we're going to do 3 reps at 80 to 85% of your 1 repetition maximum. If you don't know how to do that, just pop a comment below and I can send you a link to a 1RM calculator so you know what that load would look like. But effectively, if you could squat 100 kilos for 1, then 80% would obviously be 80 kilos for 3 reps. One RIR is 1 rep in reserve. So that means that having done that, you should feel like you could have done 1 more rep at the end of the set. So you do 3 reps, you feel like that was tough, but I could have probably got 1 more rep out of that. That's exactly what you want. We're not going to maximum here. We're trying to do a number of sets of near maximal work. There are times where you might want to go maximal, but this is not it. This type of session would probably be in the off season. This isn't the kind of thing you'd want to do in season because it is fairly heavy and you probably would have a lot of hockey on the week. So try to avoid doing loads of loading with the game on the weekend, for example. Okay, second exercise, barbell Romanian deadlift, 4 sets of 5 at 80 to 85%, again with 1 rep in reserve. Now you might wonder, why is it 3 and then 5? The same percentage loading. Well, the reason being is that 1, you will have already have done more loading in the first exercise, so you're not going to increase the loading higher than that. But secondly, because of the percentage ranges, you can play around with this in different ways. So you could do 4 sets of 3 at 85% at the back squat, and then 4 sets of 5 at 80% in the barbell Romanian deadlift, for example. Or you could go for similar percentage loadings, but you'd naturally therefore have slightly higher rep in reserve, the barbell Romanian deadlift. So you can play around this a little bit, but that just gives you a little bit of a range for the loading you should be typically looking to aim for. But about 1 rep in reserve is about right if you're doing 3 to 5 reps. Next up then, we've got the bridge and split squat as a superset. Again, the reason why is that one's more of a posterior chain focused exercise, one's more of an anterior chain focused exercise. So the bridge is more of a hamstring and glute focused exercise. The split squat is more of a quad focused exercise. And where it says D1, D2 means we're going to do these together. So we're going to do on the single leg bridge iso hold 3 sets of 3 reps of 15 seconds per side, bit of a mouthful, which means you do 15 seconds on one leg, you then switch to 15 seconds on the other leg, and you repeat that twice more. So you would have done 3 reps on each leg of 15 seconds, 45 seconds of total work per set, per leg, if that makes sense. You're going to superset that with a dumbbell split squat. That's going to be 3 sets of 8 reps per side. It's going to be a 3-0-1-0 tempo. So the reason why we want to do this is we're trying to focus again eccentrically around controlling through the hip, controlling through the knee, under load, 8 reps per side, down for 3 seconds, up for 1. Once you've done both exercises back to back, you then rest 45 seconds and do 2 more sets of that work. Finally, then we've got a foot and ankle circuit. We said that the ankle, calf, super key area to focus on. Now, this is one way of programming it. Having done the heavier work, at the end, we can just add in a foot and ankle circuit, which I quite like to do because it means you can add in lots of variety, add in loads of different exercises here in a sort of short 8-minute circuit. We could do things like submax hops, calf raises, band diversions in a little circuit, work through that for around 8 minutes. And the key over a couple of weeks would be to try and just increase the volume of work that you can tolerate in an 8 minute window, or you could simply just increase the volume of work in that circuit. So hopefully that gives you a quick overview of what a lower body strength session could look like. Again, just to clarify, this is purely for lower body strength. There are lots of ways we can complement this with power focused exercises, hypertrophy focused exercises, for example. But for this specific purpose, this type of session would work really well. If you enjoyed this, please follow, like, subscribe. And if you've got any questions, just pop a comment down below.